Alzheimer's is making the headlines recently, from soon-to-be FDA approval of a new medication to the discovery by actor Chris Hemsworth that he carries a specific gene, putting him at a higher risk for developing the disease. Alzheimer affects not only the patient, but their caregivers too. Alexis Del Cid joins us this morning with her personal story of helping her father navigate this disease that has touched their family before. Good morning. It is Tuesday, December 13th. I'm Jessica Lovell. Welcome to the Morning Medical Update. We are live inside the Dulcie Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio. Right now, there are more than 6 million Americans with Alzheimer's disease. The number is growing, and it is growing fast. The Alzheimer's Association expects in just 30 years that number will double to nearly 13 million cases. Make sure you get your questions sent in to us on YouTube, Facebook, and the Medical News Network. You can find links to all of those right there on your screen. Well, as the number of older Americans grow, so will the number of Alzheimer's cases. Right now, about 1 in 9 people 65 and older has Alzheimer's. Almost 2/3 of those cases are women. All affected share the same question: how do we prevent it, slow it, or cure Alzheimer's disease? Please welcome to our program today, Dr. Kosick C. How are you today?
All right, thank you.
Good to see you. You're a developmental neuroscientist and the scientific director for Stower's Institute for Medical Research, and we are so glad to have you with us today. Also with us is co-director of the KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and a neurologist here at the health system, Dr. Jeff Burns. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Good. We got a lot to cover today. So many questions. We are also joined with us today, my friend and colleague and host of All Things Heart, Alexis Del Cid. We're going to dive into the latest research and treatments for Alzheimer's. But Alexis, I want to start with you today. Your father was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's just a day after his sister passed away from the disease. Knowing that there was a family history there, was there always this looming fear for you?
That's an interesting question, because even though there was a history in our family, we didn't see the signs in my dad, or when we saw the signs, we didn't recognize them. His grandpa died with Alzheimer's. My grandma had Alzheimer's. My older aunt had Alzheimer's. My other aunt didn't. I mean, that's my dad. Pictures of him. I mean, he was always so active and sharp. He was a radio show host and a newsman in Chicago for more than 45 years. Like, his superpower was his brain and his wit and his sharpness. That's him at my wedding. So no, we didn't live with that fear. You just don't think it's going to happen until it happens. Now I think we're becoming more aware with research and talking about it, and Chris Hemsworth taking the test to see if he had the gene, but we didn't think about it until it happened.
Your dad, Jim, I know you two are really, really close,
yeah.
And you've taken after him in so many ways. You're like best friends, and you talk about him a lot. We love hearing stories about Jim. But when did you first realize that there was something wrong? When was that first hint this may be coming after Dad?
He was diagnosed in 2019, in July 12th. Looking back, Jess, I can see, and my mom and I can piece together, like, oh, that was a sign. Like, in about 2015, he started to drive really slowly, like a turtle. And I'd be like, step on it, Dad. He was always such a good driver, navigating the streets of Chicago, and they retired and moved here. And, and then he started to lose a sense of direction. Like, it was weird because he always had this sense in his mind. He knew exactly where to go, and that went away. And suddenly he was just relying on GPS. I'd say that went on for, a couple of years, little things like that we only see looking back. And then in 2017, 16 was when he really started to forget things and do more obvious things. Like, he'd be driving behind me, we'd be going to the same place, and he'd be taking his car, and suddenly he would just turn right. Like, I'd see in my rearview mirror, I'd be like, where's he going? He doesn't drive anymore, and that's a whole other conversation about how you navigate that. But I'd say we really started to see the signs in 2017, and finally a couple of our best friends had almost what you would say was an intervention, where my dad was too afraid and resistant to get tested for this and examined for this, and his best friends and my mom sat down and they were like, Jim, we're so worried about you and we love you. You need to explore this with a doctor, because if there's something that can help you, wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you want to help Denise, my mom, Alexis? And so then he acquiesced and went, and then he was diagnosed.
We talk about a lot of the challenges for your dad and your family. What's been one of the biggest challenges just for you adjusting through this journey?
I think the grief and navigating anticipatory grief, which is a very strange, and you feel guilty where you're grieving, but the person is still alive, but they're also not here. So not feeling the guilt of grieving someone when they're still present, physically here, and then all these complicated layers of emotions. I think that's really been the hardest part as his daughter. Now, if you ask my mom, she's got that and more. I mean, this isn't harder on, it's harder on no one, it's not harder on anyone than my mom. My mom is the one who I can't even imagine. But I'd say for all of us, it's the grief.
Yeah, many times I've looked at you across the office and said, are you doing okay? And you always say, I'm hanging by a thread. I'm just hanging by a thread.
Yeah, you're like white knuckling it some days, yeah.
Well, I know advancements in treatment and Alzheimer's, the research that goes into it, and the hope for more answers to this devastating disease is things that your family and so many others out there cling to and hope for. I want to bring in our experts today, Dr. Jeff Burns and Dr. Kosik C. with Stower. Dr. C, let's just jump into the research that you are finding, because these are the things that give us hope. Tell us what you're involved in right now and how epilepsy patients are helping with people like Alexis's dad.
Yeah, first of all, really my heart goes out to you, because I know the suffering and pain of having a somebody loved one having the disease. So and as you can see also in that that memories are actually what defines us. So the goal of our study is to trying to understand actually how we make memories and how we hold on to it. And in that process, we discovered something that actually forcing us to rethink about the diseases, what causes Alzheimer's disease and other diseases. And so far, as a basic scientist, we've been looking at in fruit fly, in mice. But if we really want to understand the disease, then we need to go to the human brain. And that's where this epilepsy patient comes into the fray, because the human brain has, for example, fruit fly brain has 150,000 neurons, but our brain has 86 billion neurons. So if you really want to study the disease, we need to go. And but question is, how do you get the brain? It's not a, of course, we are very grateful to the, the Alzheimer's Center that Dr. Burns is part of, and KU Neurosurgery Department. When patients come down with epilepsy, unfortunately, there are very few treatment, and one of the treatment is actually removal of part of the brain. That the same part of the brain are also actually involved in storing some of the memories that are very near and dear to us. So what we do essentially in collaboration with them, we collect those brain and try to understand the same processes that we have looked at in the fruit fly brain or in mice, are they really also going on in the human brain?
So how do memories that we collect become unstable?
Yeah, so it goes to the very heart of how actually the biology works. So everything that is going on in our body is eventually carried out by this thing called protein. Of course, we know about them because we eat them. But these proteins are, what is remarkable about them, they're continuously made and they disappear after some point. So in other words, when you are making a memory, some proteins comes into play and that creates the memory, but they are supposed to disappear. And it was a puzzle. How do you make something stable with unstable things? And we found the solution is actually there are very unique features of some proteins in the brain. When memory engages them, they clump. And when they clump, they become very stable. And that's how we hold on to the memories. And what is remarkable is that we found that the same type of clumping are also associated with all these diseases. And that then raises this very interesting question. We are fascinated by it, that how can you have a clumping and that cause memory loss? But again, you have this another protein clumping and causing memory to stick around. So can we understand these two processes?
So this is exciting you then about
this
the future.
is phenomenally exciting. So what is essentially telling us, we've been studying these diseases, and Dr. Burns would be the expert to tell you how long and how difficult it has been. It's a phenomenally challenging problem. And we made tremendous progress, understanding the cause of the disease, how to, take care of patients and all those things. But quite unfortunately, we still have not been able to come up with a treatment that really can resolve the disease in a way that we would like to. And so we have a set of ideas we've been trying for a while, but our studies are suggesting actually maybe there are another way to approach this problem in a completely new way. And we are hoping that over time, something will emerge from those studies, yeah.
Dr. Burns, jump in here. What type, what comes to mind when you hear this type of research based on what you've seen in the past and where we are today?
Yeah, well, it's incredibly exciting to be understanding, how memories are made at that biological level, and it's something that Dr. C is really leading the world in, and it's incredibly important. We've been working, as he said. I've been at it for 20 years, and there's been so much happening behind the scenes in the labs, and we've just accelerated the field greatly. And what hasn't changed much is what's happening at the patient level in the clinics, and that we believe in the next year is going to change quite dramatically. So it's a really exciting time, where it's all kind of coming together, that sort of understanding at the biological level, and then the treatments and the diagnostics at the patient level. And we'll be applying a lot of this new information in the next year to really change how we diagnose and treat patients with Alzheimer's.
Also on the soon horizon is a soon-to-be medication approved by the FDA. Tell us what it is, what its effect will be on patients.
Yeah, so some big news came out about 10 days ago. A new drug called lecanemab that we've been testing here, and it's been being tested all over the world, has shown some pretty promising results. It's not a cure, and it doesn't stop the disease for patients, but it does appear to pretty convincingly slow the disease in what we think is a meaningful way. It's not as dramatic as we want, but in a meaningful way. And this is a drug that we're really expecting the FDA to approve. They actually will likely approve it in their accelerated pathway within a couple weeks. And then within a few months, probably 4 to 6 months after that, they'll approve it in the traditional way, which will allow us to prescribe it in the clinic. And we're preparing for this, expecting this, and we really think this will be one big step forward in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. But as Dr. C said, it's going to take more than this. It's going to take other approaches and really going at the disease from a lot of different angles.
As far as this medication, will it benefit all Alzheimer's patients, or will it be good for just certain types or certain folks? Yeah,
so great question. It's going to benefit patients that, so it's kind of a narrow band of patients that it's right for. And so really patients with the earliest changes of Alzheimer's disease. So we'll have to actually do quite a bit of work to figure out who is that right patient and make sure we're delivering this drug in a responsible way to the right patients.
I want to talk about actor Chris Hemsworth recently found out that he carries the disease, or the gene, making him have a bigger risk at developing Alzheimer's because he got it from his mom and his dad. Again, this really increases his risk. So tell us about being tested for the gene APOE4. Who should be tested for it? How do you know to be tested for it?
Yeah, that's something you can get tested for, as Chris Hemsworth was tested. You can do it through, online, like 23andMe. You can do it through your doctor's office. Now, we don't recommend it in a casual way because of what happened with Chris Hemsworth. If you're not really understanding exactly what is that gene telling us, then you're bound to maybe misinterpret it or live with a lot of anxiety and angst about developing the disease. What APOE4 is it is a risk gene. It's not a definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's, but it does mean you're at much higher risk. And he has 2 copies of the gene, which means he's at much higher risk. Doesn't mean he's destined for it, but he is at a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's.
So you say you don't always recommend it. In what case would you recommend it? And I will say, I have a friend of mine in her early 60s, and her mother died of Alzheimer's, and she said, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
She said, I can get tested, but I don't want to know. And that's that anxiety you're talking about. So who should know?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the research setting, we do it on basically everybody, but we don't tell. We actually keep it, even each other, we sort of keep it sort of hidden and de-identified way. At the clinical level, at the patient level, we are beginning to use it in basically everybody who we're thinking about treating with this new drug. Because the gene tells us a little bit about risk of some of the adverse effects of the new drug. And so in my practice, I basically only test it for people who I'm thinking about one of these newer drugs, and then basically that's it. And I try to discourage most people from getting the test because it doesn't tell us really much more than, say, a family history. If you have a family history of the disease,
You probably know it.
You're at higher risk.
Right.
And if you have this gene, you're at a little bit higher risk. It's not that much higher, but it can be substantial, like with Chris Hemsworth. So I just tell people, eat right, exercise, do everything you can to try to prevent Alzheimer's disease, and that's basically, I stop there.
So that's the advice you would give to Alexis.
Yes.
Knowing that her aunt passed away from it, her dad has it. Just keep on keeping on.
Keeping on, stay healthy, control your heart risk factors. So if you have high blood pressure, make sure you treat it. If you have high cholesterol, make sure you treat it. Exercise, eat right, and then if you want to participate in research, there are research opportunities. Alexis, you might be too young for them still, but
I don't know. But thank you. I'm almost 50.
Nice.
I think I'm probably there. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot happening in the field to try to we're really moving things forward on that, again, in the background, in the research side, to understand what can we do to identify risk, and the genes and other things are being used to identify risk, and then do something to reduce risk for the long term. And I think 15, 20 years from now, maybe even 5 years from now, we're going to be in a very different place in terms of prevention.
Well, and when we talk about the research on this program, and we talk about how quickly it's moving, give us kind of a gauge of that. I want to hear from both of you just about the gauge of how quickly things are moving. I've had people come on here and say that we're having to kind of rewrite the statistics as we're going because things are changing so rapidly and the research is coming in so quickly and the medications are becoming available. What are your thoughts, Dr. C?
So, I think that what is exciting about it is that we are now approaching the disease with multiple different ways. Initially we focused on trying to see whether we can take care of the amyloid that we most talked about. But now we are trying to come up whether we can boost the immune system of the brain, whether that can help us. Even there is a treatment coming out, it's in a very, very formative stage. There is some type of light actually seems to be helping, at least in the mouse model of Alzheimer's disease, curing the disease or at least helping the animal. So I think there are multiple, what is exciting is that there are many different approaches that are sort of coming towards the same problem. So as opposed to just one type of solution. So I think that's what we are going to look forward to next 5-10 years, yeah.
Dr. Burns, your thought. Paint that picture for us.
I exactly agree with Dr. C. That what gives me hope and what excites me is that we're going after the disease from so many different angles. And we couldn't have said that 10, 15 years ago. We were just going after amyloid, this protein in the brain, amyloid, which has led to these new drugs. That's not a fault, but that was the only thing we were looking at 15 years ago. And today, there's so many different approaches, and I believe that's what it's going to take.
Well, and even when we just talk about this new or soon-to-be approved medication, it only treats a sliver of the patients, but that's the point, is to take it's all patients and all Alzheimer's disease patients are not created equal. So you need those specific medications, correct?
Right. Yep. Yeah, so the future that we imagine is one where patients are each patient's unique and will receive a different sort of combination of therapy based on the kinds of changes we're seeing in the brain. And this is a first step in that direction. We go after this amyloid protein, but there's other things that we're going to need to go after, and we're working on it. We've been working on it for decades in the background. Metabolism, inflammation, the immune system. There's lots of things that we need to go after and target and try to understand how does that influence the disease. And it's going to take a combination of things.
Okay, hey, Dr. C, please.
Yeah, and I may add actually, in addition to treating the disease, I think what is also changing is that how we detect it, how early we detect it. And as you know, this disease shows up early on, as Alexis was saying, before you even realize you have the disease. So the earlier we detect and better we detect, we have a better chance of treating these diseases. And there is actually a remarkable progress has been made in trying to identify the diseases as early as possible. So when you combine these two things, you detect them early and you approach the disease in multiple ways, I think the future is very encouraging.
Alexis, I want to talk to you about something else. And we've talked about this when it comes to isolation and this disease. Talk to us about that. Have you found that to be true? And maybe give us some examples.
Well, when he was first diagnosed, he was diagnosed in another state before we moved here, and the doctor said, this is a disease the whole family has. But one of the insidious ways, it's such a cruel disease because it will take down a family through isolation. And my mom and I and my dad, when he could still have this conversation, we all decided that we would be very public about it and not allow our family to be isolated. And what isolation can look like is if you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, like in my case, my dad, okay, so he might, as the Alzheimer's progresses, start to say things that other people might find strange or weird, or I'm worried that it'll make other people in the room uncomfortable. So therefore, I'm like, I don't want them to see my dad like that. I'm going to keep him home. We're not going to take him out. Well, that just isolates everyone. And you can't worry about other people's discomfort over a horrible disease that your loved one has. Most people really want to help and they'll be understanding the more they know, but you've got to talk about it because it's not something to be ashamed of. If he had any other disease, we wouldn't be worried about being private or protecting him or not talking about it. So why this one? Because it affects the brain, right? So on a couple of levels, like for caregivers, you've got to reach out, got to tell people, but also for my dad, I wanted to tell as many people as possible, just for example, for safety. Like if someone was to see my dad walking down the street, he should not be walking down the street alone, right? Like someone would be like, oh, that's Jim. He has Alzheimer's. Come on, Jim, let's go back inside. Like you need a whole team and a whole community to watch out for your loved one as well. And the more you talk about it, the more you help other people who are going through it. But the inclination is to be so private because you want to protect that person. Like I wouldn't want anyone to see my dad vulnerable. He was always this superpower of wit and charisma and charm. So a big step with his blessing was to talk about it and be open about it. And it's really helped because both my mom and I and my dad have made really good friends in the community. And you find support in unexpected ways from people you would never expect to be so supportive. And people will really surprise you with how kind they are and how understanding they are.
And as a journalist, Alexis, you found a really creative way to express yourself. And I want to talk about that here in just a moment. I want to take a quick break and check in with Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control, to share our numbers this morning. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, hi. Good.
Hi.
Yeah, right now we have 58 total in the hospital. Of those, 38 are active infections with 7 in the ICU and 2 on the ventilator. So numbers are, holding steady. Hopefully we can keep that under 40 and see, when and if we reach a peak and hopefully go down from there.
All right, I have a headline for you this morning, a scientific breakthrough. They're saying, scientists say they finally know why people get more colds and flu in the winter. What does that mean? What did they find? It didn't seem surprising, but what's behind that?
Yeah, this was looking at some of our mucosal immunity, some of the components we have in our mucosal immunity. Some of that has been looked at before. It's hard to say, is that truly functional, because we know it doesn't get cold in some of those equatorial regions, but we know that you can still have seasonal variation of viral transmission at that point. So I think it's one more data point to look at and to look at the big picture. But I think we still certainly need more investigation into this area for sure.
All right, do we have any reporter questions on the line? All right, we're going to get to community questions. And Annie wants to know, how do you tell Alzheimer's and dementia from just normal forgetfulness? Dr. C or
I think
Dr.
I will
Burns?
refer the Dr. Burns.
Because some of us feel like we're all the time forgetting stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are.
We are.
And so, yeah, that can be challenging. The key is really when it's a change for an individual, when it's really progressed. And what we look for in the clinic to define, when we get into things like mild cognitive impairment and dementia, it's when it's beginning to interfere with their usual activities. So something they've always done well, now they're having a little more issue doing it, or maybe they're unable to do it. But that kind of, is it beginning to interfere with daily function and cause problems? But it's a change for an individual. We all forget our car keys and our glasses and misplace them, but in this case, when it becomes something new and it's a real change for that individual that interferes with daily function, that's what we look for.
I want to put a QR code up on the screen, and it is for more information about resources here at the KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So check that out for more information. And on that note, Nick wants to know, what are the stages of Alzheimer's disease? How do we know what stage you're in, and what do we know about that?
Yeah. Well, okay, so Alzheimer's, we do have stages. It progresses from the very mildest, changes, and Alexis talked about some of those, and to, more severe. And we look for, there's something called, I just mentioned it, mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, which is a stage between normal aging and dementia, where we see real mild changes in memory and maybe navigation and what we call executive function, but really mild changes that don't quite interfere with daily function. And then we have the mild dementia, where we see clear interference with daily function, and then moderate and severe. And actually, relevant to the drug we're talking about, we will be looking for people in the mild cognitive impairment and very mild and mild dementia stage.
Becky saw a story about new research from KUMC showing 10,000 steps a day. That's what we talk about as like the gold standard of steps to get in, that could be a prescription for staving off dementia. Does walking help with Alzheimer's? Dr. C, jump in as well on any research you're finding about exercise and movement.
Yeah, I don't think I can count the 10,000 steps of a fruit fly, but that would be quite intriguing. But essentially, I think Dr. Barnes was mentioning before, I think if you have a healthy lifestyle, if you exercise, you eat well, and this 10,000 steps essentially is a part of that process. You are just trying to lead a healthy lifestyle.
What do you tell your patients about activity?
Exactly that. And actually, this is something we have been researching for 15 years. We're one of the leaders in the country of understanding what's the impact of exercise on the brain. We're working really hard on really trying to understand that. And the message from a study like that is more is better.
Yeah.
Exercise, get going, get more physical activity into your day, and we believe it's good for the brain. But more is better. If you can get to that 10,000 steps, great. But one thing, don't get hung up on that. It's not essential that you hit that threshold, but more is better. So
more is better, and make a goal for set goals for yourself to do better and better each time. Shannon, her father-in-law has Alzheimer's. She wants to know, what resources does the health system have for caregivers? And before I get your comment about the importance of support, I want to put up a bit.ly link on your screen. It'll give you more resources for caregivers out there, and also in our community outreach for caregivers, which is so important. I would imagine, and Alexis has talked about that, just the importance of community support, right?
Yeah. I mean, Alexis said it's a disease of the family. And there's no caregiver I've met who's felt prepared for the job and who feels confident that they're doing everything right. And most of the time they are. But, we've put a lot of effort into building up our caregiver resources. We have social workers who could help, and we have online webinars and a series online. We have weekly webinars, and so there's a lot that we've put into it, and into sort of how do we help prepare the caregiver for this journey.
David wants to know, Dr. C, do you know if or think this soon-to-be FDA-approved medication could help his mother preserve what memory she has left? You talk about those precious memories, so how do we preserve them, and could this help?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a great question. It goes to the heart of how we think about memory, right? So you have to make memories, and you have to hold on to it. And so fortunately, very old memories are in a part of the brain, and the way they are stored, they are actually quite resilient. So you can have your childhood memories. So one of the problems that many of these patients has actually making new memories. So you put your car key, or you put something and you forget. So the making memories and remembering immediate things, that's the problem. And the hope is that these drugs will help with this ability to create new memories. So you still don't worry too much. That's the very end stage of the disease when you begin to lose really old memories.
Kim wants to know, how likely are you to get dementia if it runs in your family?
Well, so you're at a little bit higher risk, but you're not destined for it for the vast majority. But you hit some of the stats early in the program. 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 have it, and 1 in 3 over the age of 85. So if you live a long time, you're at high risk. And if you have a family history, you're at a little bit higher risk.
Irene wants to know, are there any types of medications that, like blood pressure medications or anything that might be related to Alzheimer's? Are we finding anything out about that, or is there any ongoing research about the effects of medications?
Well, there's a lot of research in that area. I mean, in terms of driving that actual Alzheimer's process, I'd say probably not medications driving that Alzheimer's process, but there's a lot of medications that impact memory. Over-the-counter sleep meds or prescribed sleep meds, pain meds, they can really influence memory and sort of unmask. If somebody has really mild memory symptoms, they can really bring it out, make it appear like it's causing it. And so you want to minimize those types of medications for sure.
Jean is getting the last question. Just curious about continuing to work, exercise the brain with puzzles and different types of activities. Is that true to keep yourself sharp and to help in some preventative way keep and hold on to that memory?
Yeah, we think so. We think, and we tell every patient, stay active mentally, stay active physically, exercise, keep your brain active. We're doing a lot of research in that area, a whole lot, and there's news coming out every day. We'll kind of probably swing back and forth in terms of, what we're finding, but it's good for you in a lot of different ways, and we think it's good for the brain.
Keep more is more. More is good when it comes to steps and exercising your mind. Alexis, I want to hear all about this blog. You have used writing about your father as a way to, help others in the community, share your personal story. You're out there helping others. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. Tell us about it and where people can find it.
So I post a lot of the things to my Facebook page, which is Alexis Del Cid TV, but also on WordPress, alexisdelcid.wordpress.com. I started doing this just privately, and then I thought, why am I being so private about this? If I can connect with someone else, what wouldn't I want to? Plus, I felt like I want people to remember my dad, and I want them to know my dad. And every time I feel like I'm floating in space with my grief, I'll write something about him, and then I feel anchored to him again. And I've loved that, and that goes to reaching out. And I cannot tell you how many people have responded with their own stories about their loved ones, and they've said things that are so beautiful about their experience. And I've found, I was stunned. I did not know 1 out of 9 people have it, what you said at the top of the program. That is just stunning. So through this blog, I felt a real connection with people who are saying, oh my gosh, I felt that same thing. I didn't put it into words, but thank you. And then they'll say something that I didn't think of, and I thank them. And that comes to the sharing and to the reaching out.
And it's been really helpful for you, right?
Cathartic. It's weird. I'll feel like I'm building up like a volcano. Then I'll sit down and cry, and my husband knows. My son's like, oh, she's blogging again. And then I'll be crying at the computer, and I can breathe for a few days. And then it builds up, and then I write it all out, and then, you feel like you can breathe again after you express something.
Well, thank you so much.
And I'm doing it for my dad.
Well, we love hearing stories about Jim. We've come to know him, and like I said, you'll come in and tell us something about him, and we feel like we know him, and it's great. And I know.
Can I say something? Because it's something that you do that is awesome. And I'm going to get choked up saying this, but I love that you ask me about my dad. And I would encourage, you're like, oh, what was he like in the 70s? Or did he do anything funny today? And I think that's such a gift to me when you do that. And I would encourage anyone watching this, if you haven't been touched by Alzheimer's, but you know someone who has, ask them about their loved one. Ask them what was the coolest thing about them. What do they miss? What do they do? Just ask them basic things. You don't have to say anything perfect. You're not going to fix it. And you're not going to make, no one's going to make us, my mom and I, feel better about this, but it's comforting to be asked about it and for someone just to be present for it. So I would encourage anyone watching to reach out to someone if you know they have it. Even the person who has it, call them. Who cares if they repeat themselves or don't know who you are? Guess what? The person sitting next to them, their loved one, their spouse, their daughter will know that you called and that you reached out to them, and that's going to mean the world because they're feeling isolated. So thank you, Jess, for always doing that. And I would hope that if anyone's watching this and you don't know what to do, just do that. Just reach out to the family or reach out to the person who happens to have this disease, because it's going to be a gift to the family.
Alexis, thank you so much. And as your mom said, don't keep it a secret. It's nothing to keep a secret. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm going to get to final thoughts from our guests. You've shared so much, and I appreciate it. Any other final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I have a pro tip. If you take your loved one out for lunch or something, and I'll keep this quick, something that's been helpful is I'll take the servers aside or the person in the store, and I'll be like, hey, my dad has Alzheimer's. He might say something inappropriate. He's hilarious and awesome, and I promise you would have loved him back in the heyday. And they always are like, say no more. Like most of the time, they have someone in their life who has Alzheimer's. That's how prevalent it is, and it changes the whole dynamic of your experience of being out. Just secretly go to the bartender or the waiter and just be like, my so-and-so has Alzheimer's. Go easy on us. And that makes it so freeing for have an outing with that person.
Not so anxious about it,
Right.
and you can just enjoy the time that you have. Great tip. Keep the tips coming. Keep your blog going. We love you. Appreciate you.
Love you too.
Always. Dr. C, your final thoughts today.
Yeah, I think it's just also highlights how important it is to try to understand how the brain works, and how the normal biology of the brain, and you get unexpected insights that it can really help patient like what Alexis's dad. So I think that shows how important it is to keep on doing what we are doing, and
keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for coming on. You promise you're going to come back?
Yes,
Go
absolutely.
back to Stower, do more research,
We'll be happy to.
Go back to work, and then come back and give us all
We'll
the
be
good
happy to.
information. Okay, Dr. Burns.
Oh, I'd say it's just never been a more hopeful, exciting time, and
That makes us feel better.
yes,
Thank you.
We're diagnosing it differently. We're going to have blood-based markers of Alzheimer's in the clinic soon. We have it in the research side, where we're going to be able to detect changes of Alzheimer's in the blood, and then we're going to have these new drugs and hopefully more to follow that are giving us a lot of hope that we can slow the disease and potentially prevent it someday.
All right, get back to work, but you're coming back too.
All right.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Dr. Hawkinson, final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you to our guests, and thank you to Alexis, of course. We know all of these things that we talk about are so vitally important. I know my family has been affected by Alzheimer's disease. My Nana passed away with that as well. So just very prevalent in just all of these topics. And I think to Alexis's point, it's, have those conversations and just keep that in the open, keep that flow of ideas and those emotions free, so that you can help your friends and your other ones who may be going through not only Alzheimer's, but other physical and mental health issues as well.
Doc Hawk, thanks so much, and thank you for being with us today. You can catch our updates anytime by logging back on to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Go out, have a fantastic day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for Open Mics with Dr. Stites at 8 a.m. It's been nearly 6 months since the University of Kansas Cancer Center achieved comprehensive status. I'm Jessica Lovell on the next Open Mics with Dr. Stites. A lot has happened, including more funding for cancer trials to keep patients closer to home, as well as plans for a new research building. We share a 6-month checkup Wednesday at 8. We want to let you know that starting next week, we will be taking a couple of weeks off from our program so that we can spend some time with our families.
The good news is you'll still be able to watch our morning medical update every weekday and All Things Heart on Thursdays.
That's right. We have chosen some of our very favorite episodes from the last year as encores, and we've recorded some pretty fun introductions to help remind you what each of those episodes is about. Wait until you see how many ugly Christmas sweaters Dr. Stites and Dr. Hawkinson own. Very interesting.
I can't wait. And then we return with live programming on Wednesday, January 4th. Until then, happy holidays.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now, everywhere podcasts are available.